Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday night live streaming service here at Lost River. We are working our way through the New Testament, which we've been reading for the first quarter of the year. And we get the chance, the three of us, to discuss what we read the previous week and invite you to join in with us. If you'll sign into your Google or YouTube account, you'll be able to join in the chat and make any comments or ask questions that you'd like to make. And we always enjoy getting those. Sometimes people just write in to cheer us on. We appreciate that too. Anything that gives us a connection with you at home who are watching is appreciated. So feel free to do so. You guys doing okay tonight?
Doing well.
Good. Well, we decided to just focus all of our attention in tonight's study on the Gospel of John. It is unique to all of the Gospels. There are 4 Gospels or biographies about the life of Jesus. The synoptics, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, have a lot of overlapping and similar content. And though they have different points of emphasis, there's sort of a similar feel to them, where John is an outlier. It feels completely different and has, I don't remember what the percentage is, but the majority of its content is unique to John. It is not duplicated in the other 3 Gospels. And it's personally my favorite. I love the Gospel of John. I read it frequently and for personal devotional purposes. I don't know if the word speaks to me is the right thing to say or not, but I connect really well with it. It reveals Jesus to me in a very personal and powerful and transformative way. And I thoroughly enjoy any chance I get to read or discuss the Gospel of John, and to be able to do so with you guys tonight is a real pleasure. We want to begin at the end of the book, and that for good reason. Sometimes a writer tells you what he's up to at the beginning of the book, and sometimes he waits till the end to kind of tell you, hey, here's what's been going on. And that's kind of John's approach. So very near the end of the book, John tells us explicitly why he undertook the project of writing the Gospel of John. Ben, would you tell us or read us what he has to say there?
Yeah, this is from John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. It reads, "Therefore many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name."
So he writes the book. He cites specific signs, he says, for the purpose of providing us, I guess, with evidence or testimony that will make our faith in him credible or reasonable. I talked about this recently in a message about faith, that it's sometimes said that faith is just sort of a leap in the dark. It's just believing without evidence. Reading a bunch of atheists, and they were consistently making that claim that Christians are people who just believe without evidence, and that they, as scientifically minded people, couldn't believe something without evidence. But this passage really addresses that point. John says, I'm not asking you to believe without evidence. I'm giving you the evidence so that you can believe. And he cites certain remarkable things that Jesus did and said so that we could come to the place where we put our faith in Jesus. Based on evidence, we trust in him. And we trust him with everything, such that our lives can be transformed and we could be, as he says, saved or find eternal life in the Son, in Jesus Christ. So as we think about the signs that John records, there are 7 specific signs in the Gospel of John, and they're purposefully and skillfully arranged in a particular way. We don't have time to look at all of them, but one of the ones that he cites that really is meaningful to me, that has helped me come to a faith in Jesus, that has also been transformative as I've thought about it, is the story in chapter 9 of Jesus healing a man who was born blind. And the whole chapter is fascinating. It's a man who was well known to the people of the area as he sat and begged. And as Jesus and his disciples passed by, his disciples had a question. You guys remember what the question was that they asked him?
Who sinned that he be born blind?
Obviously, if the man's blind and born blind, somebody sinned for this to have happened. I suppose in one sense we could agree with them. Adam sinned and brought sorrow and suffering and death into the world. So yeah, I guess you could trace it back there, but I don't think that's what they meant. They were looking for some more immediate cause of this man's suffering. And they even asked, was it him who sinned or his parents? And I'm not sure how they figured he could have sinned before he was born, but they asked the question. What's fascinating to me is I'm sure there were probably other people who had looked at this man and asked questions or wondered to themselves why he was in this state. And maybe other rabbis had given lectures to their disciples about why this man was in the shape that he was in. But Jesus stops and does something. And he says that it's not of who sinned question, but it's how can this situation be used to show and reveal the glory of God. And so Jesus interacts with the man, has this really strange interaction with him, and ultimately he spits on the ground, makes mud of the saliva, rubs it in the man's eyes, and sends him away to the pool of Siloam, which means sent, to go wash. And I'm imagining the guy was saying, yeah, I'm going to have to go wash after you just spat and put mud in my eye. So he goes and he washes, but then the miracle transpires. When he washes, he opens his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he is able to see. Well, as you can imagine, when he does this, everyone is amazed by it. You can obviously tell when a person who's been blind their whole life is suddenly able to see. And so it creates a real hubbub. It creates quite the scene as people are interested in how this man has come to be able to see. And so somebody gets the great idea, well, we need to run tell the Pharisees what's happened. They'll have an answer. They'll be able to explain this to us. And that's what we all look for, I think, when amazing things happen. We look for somebody who's able to explain what this means. So they go to the Pharisees thinking that they'll be able to explain what it means. And the Pharisees immediately seize upon a detail. Darrell, what detail do they seize upon?
Caught me flat-footed.
Okay. It was the Sabbath.
Oh, that one.
That one. That was the detail. So not that a blind man can see, my bad, the blind man can see, but that it happened on the Sabbath. And so we've got a problem. We're not going to rejoice over a wonderful event, but we're going to try to get to the bottom of this law breaking that has taken place. So they call in the man's parents, they question them, they question the man multiple times, and the dialogue between this man and the Pharisees is priceless. For all their learning and expertise, he just runs circles around them in terms of the logic. They're saying, we know that this man was a sinner because he did this on the Sabbath. And he's like, well, it was a sinner. I don't know about that. I just know I was blind, now I see. So I think he was at least a prophet. And it keeps escalating to the point that they finally say, well, you were born in sin, and here you are trying to enlighten us, the Pharisees, the most scholarly people of the law on the planet. And so they cast him out, which means they cast him out of the synagogue, kicked him out of the church and out of the social and business and everything life of the community. He was kicked out of that. So he now becomes an outcast as a result of his sticking up for Jesus, who had opened his eyes. So he shows a lot of courage in doing that. But then the story goes on to explain how Jesus then finds the man after he's been kicked out. And Jesus says, verse 35, heard they had cast him out. And having found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he answered, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? I think it's like, I know that voice. And I don't know who the Son of Man is, but if you tell me who he is, I'll believe in him, because he recognizes, I think, that maybe this is Jesus who's healed him. And Jesus answered him and said, sir, it is, Jesus answered him and said, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. And he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. And then Jesus, I think, explains the whole miracle by saying, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. And some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, are we also blind? And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say, we see, your sin remains. An ideology, or even if it's a religious ideology, has this tendency to take the part and make it the whole. All that they could see was the Sabbath, and in the way that they construed it, it had been broken. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else was worthy to be brought into consideration as to the identity of the one who had done this miracle. And so no evidence to the contrary could be allowed in to challenge their religious view, their ideology. It, to their point of view, explained everything, and so they refuse to hear it, and they reject the person who tries to get them to see it. And so when Jesus makes the statement, they recognize that he's challenging them, and that statement that those who claim that they see are blinded and guilty, and those who acknowledge their blindness are unable to see. And I think as I considered the life of Jesus, the Gospel of John that presents him to us, I see someone who's opened my eyes, like this blind man, to so many things, and caused me to see the world and to see myself, to see other people in totally different ways than I ever would have before. That's why, in part, I've chosen this particular sign that Jesus performs as one that helps me find a reason to believe in Jesus and a desire to want to believe in him, because he keeps opening my eyes. So do you guys have any thoughts in addition to that about this particular miracle?
That's just so characteristic of the way people think. They get locked into a certain way of thinking. They've thought that way for a long time, maybe their whole lives. They've been trained to think a certain way. And if you take them outside of that paradigm, they just are unable to operate.
Nothing makes sense.
So they begin to react out of fear, or it may even come out as anger, because they're unable to process what's being thrown at them. And that just, so it just captures, I think it's a microcosm of human nature, that once we've been trained to think a certain way, anything that challenges becomes as a true challenge to that makes us afraid, and fear causes us to do some really drastic things.
We create a model in which we feel like reality or our experience makes sense,
yes.
And then some new information comes in that challenges and threatens to blow it up or make us revise it, and we don't know what that might look like, and so it's easier just to, in anger or fear, attack the messenger.
Yeah.
Which is, it's just so exactly what happens. And I've felt that. I've had, when Jesus has challenged my own personally held views about a thing, and I've had to rethink it, it's kind of scary. Mm-hmm. And yet we're either going to be in the position of those who say we see everything, or the ones who acknowledge before him in humility, I'm blind, and let him open us to a new understanding, a better one.
Yeah, I don't think any of us is exempt from it.
So, one of the things I love about this story, there's a couple things, but one of the first ones is just, this is one of the only instances where we see the Pharisees doubt themselves in the Gospels, and Jesus didn't even do it. They doubted themselves because of this man. And I know Jesus was obviously directly involved in the whole thing. I'm not saying he didn't have anything to do with it, but they doubt themselves because of this man, and then how Jesus made a point with them. And it's one of the only times you see the Pharisees say, well, hey, are we blind? Like, is there something going on that we're missing? Like, and so I think it's a little inkling into like Acts and everything, where you start to see a lot of these, some Pharisees at least, become Christians. there were this group inside of the Pharisees, that Nicodemus being one of them, who clearly had some humility to a certain degree, at least, even though that is interesting even in the church. But I also just love the whole, like, the fact that Jesus just abandons this guy after he heals him. I think it's so fascinating. And it's just the story, it seems so unwritten, you know? It's like no one would write this story to praise Jesus, to bring him as this like hero. It kind of looks like he leaves him high and dry. And it's a really fascinating story that just like, one of those stories to look at and say, man, no person would have written this. Maybe they would have, you know, but I don't think, I would never have thought to write that the Son of God would do this. But it's perfect. It's perfect in the sense that he does something and lets it have its effect and doesn't meddle and doesn't need to be standing up for this guy. He lets the guy be himself and speak up for himself, and it tests him, and that guy comes out the other side with a pure faith. It's amazing.
That's a brilliant point I hadn't thought about. And we're that way too, because we think, well, you know, I believe Jesus has saved me, but then we go through a period of trial or difficulty and feels like our prayers are going unanswered, and maybe feeling even like they're unheard, and we feel left alone and we have to work through this. But like this man, that sort of testing where you have to think for yourself a bit can bring you out the other side, where Jesus reveals himself to him again, and he's in a much stronger position.
Absolutely.
And I love the fact that it just says that when the man realized that who Jesus was, he just falls down and worships him. And I think that's where all of these signs should lead us. That's where John tells us that they should, is to this kind of faith that causes us to completely commit ourselves to, in awe and reverence, the only one who could do this. Well, that's one that I found very powerful. And again, this ties in with the end of the book, in which he says there are these signs that he has recorded for us to have a reason to believe, and in believing would find life. Darrell, have you got one as well that really you find powerful and transformative?
Well, the narrative about Jesus turning water into wine, I won't make much of it, but if you just think about, forget about chemistry, forget about arguments about whether or not Christians should drink wine, and just think about Jesus taking something that's ordinary and turning it into something that's extraordinary. And it's kind of an analogy for what he does to lives also. He takes the ordinary and through faith turns them into something extraordinary. And you think about all of the people of faith in the Old Testament, the ones perhaps that are mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. Ordinary people, fallible people, add faith, and what you get are extraordinary acts of courage and demonstrations of the power of God through these ordinary people. So I see it standing alone as a powerful sign in itself. The people who were around must have been just dumbfounded by this miracle. But it seems to me to have just more meaning than what you see on the surface there.
Yeah, I've read also people talking about, you know, that was pots that contained water that was for purification rituals under the old law, and that, you know, he turns them into wine, which is an indication of something that's come to its fruition, and there's and it's celebratory, and it speaks to the transitioning really from the old to the new way, and there just seems to be so much there that, like you say, we often never get to, because we get hung up on the wine question and can't get to the actual point that Jesus was making in performing the miracle. Well, Ben, how about you?
I mean, I feel like I picked the obvious one, but the raising of Lazarus is hard to, outside of Jesus' own raising from the dead, is the most amazing miracle. I mean, and just the dialogue with Martha right before what happens in chapter 11, John chapter 11, verse, what is it? Verse 20 says, Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, but Mary stayed at the house. Martha then said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And she said to him, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. And it's like the whole dialogue leading up to it is, I know you would want to talk about that statement too. It's so amazing, this idea of just her faith even before this, like, he's dead. If you had been here, he wouldn't have died. And now that you're here, I still am convinced that you can do something about this. And then he brings up the resurrection. She's like, yeah, I know he's going to be raised. Like, that's old hat. It's like all these things that are a huge deal. She's right there in her faith. And then it seems like Jesus was still like pushing her a little bit, testing her. And she was right there the whole time. This whole dialogue here, this hugely traumatic event for her. And her faith in Jesus was it transcended that moment so much that it's almost more impressive than the actual healing of Lazarus being not healing, but resurrected. But that sign in general, everything around it is just really emotional and really powerful. And so it's hard to argue with it.
Tried to imagine what it would have been like for Mary and Martha during the days that they're waiting. They sent the message to the one you love is sick. Mm-hmm. And Jesus purposefully waits until he dies and then begins the journey home. And they're thinking, we've seen him do miracles for other people.
Yeah.
And they didn't even know them. Some of them were Gentiles. And this is his friend that he cares so deeply about. Surely he's going to come. And he gets sicker and sicker, and then he dies.
Yeah.
And they have to, in fact, have the funeral. And Jesus still isn't there, and then he shows up. That's why my reading of it, this is the interesting thing, about the different nuances you can get. I see and agree with the faith there, but I've always thought both in Mary and Martha, there was a little bit of, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. It was almost a little bit of, you should have been here.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's open to interpretation, right? But they certainly believed that if he had been here, he wouldn't have died, and he could have prevented it. Yeah. And they did believe he would rise again. But that revelation of, the resurrection is not just an event. It's ultimately a person. Mm-hmm. And I am the resurrection. It's amazing.
Ben asked a question in my class on Romans a couple weeks ago about the word glory. If you notice, the word glory is used in this passage in connection with the resurrection of Lazarus. He kind of teases the sisters early on by saying, I'm going to show you the glory. I'm going to show you the glory of the Father. About down in verse 40, so Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believe, you would see the glory of God? There is a connection between God's glory and the resurrection that takes place here. And you see it in other places in the New Testament. Romans 6, for example, where he's describing baptism as a resurrection. We're united with Jesus in his death. We're raised from the dead by the glory of the Father. So the connection between those two words, glory and resurrection, is a theme that sort of recurs throughout the New Testament. And the glory that's bestowed upon the new creation at the time of the resurrection is talked about in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So pay attention to that association between those two words. It's really fascinating.
That's interesting. Kim Wagner commented and said, God is working in our lives even if we do not detect it. He is never far away.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it can seem like it to us, but by faith we know he is there.
And in both of these stories, John 9 and John 11, there's that element where Jesus is.
He's absent, but he's present. Yeah, and that's that. Thank you, Kim. That's exactly the kind of thing you would expect Kim to say. It's such a wonderful statement. But you look at John 11, and if my construction of it is correct, and they're waiting and they're yearning and maybe even disappointed that Jesus hasn't come, yet John is over and over again, I think like 4 times in just a few verses, it says that Jesus loved them.
Yeah.
And even his decision not to go was motivated by love. So his absence was because he loved them and cared about them, and he wanted to show them something that they would be able to carry with them the rest of their lives that was far greater than just another healing. Mm-hmm. When he raised their friend from their brother from the dead, well, that changed everything. So, all right, we spent a good bit of time on that. There's another series of statements aside from these 7 miraculous events that give us a reason to believe, that tells us what we're believing in, and that's what Jesus said about himself. And one of the ways that John arranges this or highlights it are a number of specific I am statements that Jesus made. I can't remember, are there 7 I am statements as well that Jesus makes in the book, claiming to be of someone of great significance. Darrell, which of these I am statements does Jesus make that you find most helpful?
They're all helpful in different ways, but the statement that he makes in chapter 14, verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That really just says so much about who Jesus is. The way, it gives us a sort of direction in life. The truth gives us something to anchor ourselves to. And the life sort of presents a kind of projection of the future. It presents a hope for us.
Like a destination.
And then he says, no man comes to the Father but by me. So there's a clarification that's taking place here. Jesus is crystallizing some ideas in our heads, whereas the world may throw a lot of variations at us or a lot of ambiguity at us, and Jesus answers those ambiguities and those variations with clarity and with certainty about some things. Those simple statements, I'm the way, the truth, I'm the life, can answer a lot of life's questions for us if we just rely upon it.
Mm-hmm. And they come in the context of questions too. The disciples are trying to figure this out. They don't know what's going on, and they're asking these questions, and Jesus is just laying that out there for them. And I love the way he doesn't tell them, hey, I know a way. Mm-hmm. He's like, I am the way, and the way is through a person and in a person. Makes it so different than just a religion. Again, we've talked about several times in the studies, a religion of rules versus a personal relationship that provides us guidance in all kinds of circumstances that an abstract rule alone can't provide. So, how about you, Ben?
I really like in John 8:12 where he says, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. And it just connects to so many things. It connects to Psalm 119. I think it's verse 105. You know, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Connects even to Genesis 1, you know. That the first thing God makes is light. And so many people are like, well, that couldn't happen physically with the sun being created later. They make all these arguments. And I think that misses the point of the fact that God is light. And he enters in creation with his speech, and light is the first thing that has to, by God's nature, be created. Because he is light. And everything that God touches, everything God's involved with is full of light. And there's so much of, that's not just symbolism, there's so much truth about what comes with light, and energy, and all this stuff that comes with truth, and visibility, and tangibility, and reality. You know, it's like there's so much about it that's anchored in being able to see through light. I mean, I think about the opposite. When the Egyptians had the plague of darkness, we kind of think, well, that wasn't a big deal. But you read about it, and for 3 days, it was so dark they couldn't see their hand in front of their face, and it says they didn't move. They were so scared, they couldn't even move. And that's what life without light is like. Without God, without Jesus, there's this darkness that isn't just a darkness, it's a darkness of fear and immobility and total helplessness. And so this statement is so packed and so tied to all these other events that God has been involved with throughout the Bible. I think it's one of those obvious ones. We think about light a lot, but I think it's also one that's so laden with implication we don't often cut down to see all the truth of it. So I just love it.
John actually is a light is kind of an obsession with John.
Yeah.
You go over to 1 John and you read chapter 1. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. And then he talks about having fellowship with the light, and the role that sin and humility and confession play in that remaining.
And in that connection, I like to think of the light as something that is open and revealing, and darkness is hidden. And it's easy then to make that association morally with sin and shame, guilt. And we want to live our lives in the light. We want to live our lives in the open. We want to conduct ourselves in a way that we have no shame, and we can be in complete fellowship with one another, because that's the walk that we are on together. And as Jesus said, if you follow me, you won't stumble in the darkness. My life is open, and I broadcast light to everyone who follows after me, and it's a beautiful thing. It's a great metaphor. The one I picked was John chapter 10, in which Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. I think for me, Darrell, being an elder, one of the, and we talk a lot here, we use the word shepherd, a biblical term for an elder. I don't know that I ever appreciated how much I needed a shepherd until I became one. That I'm totally inadequate to do this work without being led by someone greater than myself. How could I possibly, as a dumb sheep myself, presume to lead other people if I'm not following someone who actually knows the way? And in John chapter 10, Jesus tells us that he is that good shepherd. And in some ways, I sort of see my job as just kind of being one of the first followers. You ever heard of talking about the importance of a first follower? It's like there's a room of people, and a leader asks for something to be done, and everybody sits there, nobody does anything, and it's this awkward silence. But if you get one person who's the first follower, who will get up and do what the leader asked, then everybody else will quickly fall into place. And maybe that's what elders need to think of themselves as doing, as first followers who are seeing what Jesus is saying and where he's leading, and do that by example so that the rest of the sheep will follow too. And what I love about the way Jesus describes himself as the good shepherd is this question at this point in John's gospel has been developing as to who do you trust. Again, in chapter 9, the Pharisees are saying he's a deceiver. He's leading the people astray. And the blind man who's healed is saying, no, he's opened my eyes. He's a good man. He's a prophet. We should listen to him. And you have John does this masterful job of everybody's trying to figure Jesus out and sort their way through. Who should we follow? The Pharisees? Should we follow Jesus? And Jesus says, well, I'm the good shepherd, and how do you know? Well, he says, verse 11, because the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Mic drop, case closed. That's the shepherd you follow, not the one who runs away at the first sign of trouble or danger, but the one who lays down his life for the sheep. And that echoes something I know you referred to a lot, Darrell, is from Ezekiel 34, where God has this vicious indictment of the leadership of Israel, calling them shepherds who are useless and who are actually feeding on the sheep rather than feeding the sheep. And then he says something about how God's going to remove them and he himself will become their shepherd. And then he later says that he will provide a shepherd of the son of David. And we see how Jesus is both. He's the son of David according to the flesh and God in the flesh. And he becomes the good shepherd who ultimately and literally gives his life on the cross to drive away the demons and the darkness and the wolf that would have devoured all of us. And in the giving of his life, he feeds the world with his own body and blood. And it's to me the most powerful of all the metaphors that Jesus refers to as the I am statements. Well, let's move along. One more thing that I think we could not cover the Gospel of John without mentioning is going to the beginning. We started at the end, let's move to the beginning, and this may be the last thing we have time to discuss. But the beginning of this book is is dynamite. His opening is a mind-blowing series of assertions about the identity of Jesus. Ben, you do a remarkably good job of reading the text. Would you read the first 5 verses of the Gospel?
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it.
As I said, they're powerful words, and it's such densely packed material. What do you see, Ben, going on here in these verses in part?
Yeah, I mean, it connects to what we were talking about with John 8, where Jesus says, I'm the light. Like this whole usage of the idea of light is, it has to go back to creation. Then the verbiage, in the beginning, that's how Genesis 1 starts. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning was the Word. And so when John opens his gospel and he starts talking about Jesus Christ, about the Son of God, the Son of Man, the Messiah, the Lamb of God, he starts talking about it. He connects it to the fact that this was the one God had always intended. This was not just that, this is God who came down in the flesh, and who is, one of the phrases I love from this is verse 18, no one has seen God at any time, the only begotten of God, the only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. None of us could understand God. We could hear about him, we could hear God's rules, we could hope to try and live up to them. But until Jesus came into the world, no one understood God. And then Jesus was God on earth, because from the bosom of the Father, he could explain it. So it all goes back to, God's been looking forward to this since creation, to describe himself, to draw close to us in a way that would be meaningful, beyond meaningful. But sorry, I probably went beyond the question, but I just...
No, that's good, and I see what you're saying there, and I love the way through that language he connects that though he's starting something new and telling the story of Jesus and the coming of the new covenant that we will have with him, but it's not a new thing. It's a continuation of the story that began in Genesis 1.
It's always the plan.
It's always the plan. Yeah. Good. Well, Darrell, specifically for you, I was thinking about this Greek word that's translated word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's this Greek word, logos or logos, whatever pronunciation you prefer. And to a Greek-speaking audience of the first century, that would have been a word full of meaning and freight. What are your thoughts about John's use of that term?
Well, like you said, the word is loaded with meaning. We find it in our word biology, okay? Life plus something. That something is really more than just a word, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really a study, it's an explanation, it's a reasoning out of the concepts that all make up the idea of biology. And so to the Greeks, from everything that we can read, this word had a lot of meaning, but to the philosophers especially, it had a special connection to the divine. When you were trying to understand the world by pure reasoning, you were coming close to God. You're coming close to the divine. So the idea was that reasoning comes down from heaven. Well, it's then very interesting that this reasoning to the Greeks would have been kind of an abstraction. It would have been kind of impersonal. It would have been something that's far away, that's coming close to us through this process of reasoning, but John actually gives it a personality. He's saying that this reason is not a thing, it's a he. And he specifically then moves, as the passage goes on, from the kind of inanimate language that you might connect with the word logos to an animated form of the word, that he came into the world, that he was the light of life, and that he was the one that was connected with the Father. And so then as this development takes place, this word, already rich in meaning, begins to take on a whole different set of meanings, because if this is a person, then this is somebody that you can actually have a relationship with, and he'll go on to describe that relationship a little bit.
Very good. I've heard Jordan Peterson, a psychologist who's become pretty famous over recent years, talking about this, and he does some really interesting things, thinking about the Logos incorporating the idea of, as you were describing, Darrell, these sort of philosophical ideas of the ultimate, the perfection, the pure reason, the cosmic realities, and then boom, all of that vast eternal reality and logic and reason finds a specific iteration in a particular person in history, and it's like, that is mind-blowing, and that is the wonder of the incarnation, right? It's the universal becoming the particular, the cosmic becoming an individual, and that actually happened in history in the person of Jesus, that God became flesh and dwelt among us. And I think that's the wonder of the Gospel of John, as he goes through showing it what it looks like when eternal God became one of us, and as you said, so that he could reveal himself to us in a way that we could understand. And I was Jarrett and I were talking about this a few weeks back, and we were just talking about, and I think you were hitting on this a minute ago, how could we possibly really ever know who God was? I mean, the Old Testament was great, and I think partly because of its anticipation of this was going to happen, but we're just grasping at straws as finite individual people walking in the darkness, trying to use reason to whatever extent we can to grapple with this. But what do we know? I mean, how could we possibly know God? And how could we know that he cares about us, that he loves us, that we have any significance to him whatsoever, unless he did this? And because he did this, and what he did when he did this, dying on the cross, now we know. And that's the only way we can.
Pat Smith made a good cross-reference to Revelation 21:23. I know her as Mama Smith, but the eternal light and glory of all this, exactly everything we're saying, this is the embodiment of who Jesus is.
And when you receive him as that, the eternal light and glory, he's given us reasons to believe that that's who he is, and when we do, it changes everything, and we don't walk in the darkness but have the light of life. And when we believe that, we can have life in his name. And that's why John wrote the book.
Yep.
So I hope that our discussion of what John wrote has been beneficial to you. And if you found light and life in his name, then let us know, and we'd be glad to talk with you further about that and rejoice with you. We thank you all for joining us tonight, and we look forward to studying again next week. Not exactly sure what we're going to do, whether cover some epistles, or we may just jump to the book of Revelation and dive into it headlong. So stay tuned until next week to find out. Same time, same channel. Darrell, would you close us out tonight with prayer?
Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for the revelation of yourself in your Son, Jesus. One that we can actually look upon, one whom we can handle with our hands and we can behold with our eyes, through the witness and the testimony of the apostles, and particularly tonight through the eyes of John, who was actually with him and testifies to us of who he was. We thank you so much Father, for this demonstration of yourself, that we might know you through him. We ask you, Lord, that as we go on into this week, that we may become more like him, so that we can be more like your divine character. And we look forward to being together again next week as our respite and as our source of strength and encouragement for one another for the week to come. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.